This is Lightning Power Lunch with Dave Mishkin and Greg Linnelli on Lightning Radio.
Yeah, he's obviously, reads the game as good as anybody and saw an opportunity to take away the puck and did his thing on the breakaway. So huge play for us. Obviously turned into the game winner, and it's been great to have him back. Even just missing one game feels like an eternity for us when he's out. So such a huge part of this team, and great for him to get rewarded there.
Guess we're not shooting for offense too much in the third. We still do, but not as much as we did previous years. And that commitment to play a good defensive game, so obviously it helps a lot. And so that's the result.
Well, I'll be honest, this was not our best night, and we just turned the puck over way too often, and it was just a good thing. We were fortunate Philly wasn't capitalizing on it, and so in the third, though, as the game started, as that period started dwindling down, we simplified our game. Normally, when we're playing like that, it's good things can happen. It doesn't sound that exotic, but it's good for us, and so we simplified. Then we got better. Then we did. We were kind of limiting the chances against, but it was way too many turnovers for us in that game.
It was an ugly game, let's be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think the Lightning had their best. We say that sometimes on this show. It was not what do you call it, partner? A Picasso?
Yeah, a Picasso.
It wasn't a Picasso, but
I don't know much about art, but that is an expression.
I was a stick figure guy, so there you go, in terms of how I would draw. But I do know the end result was a Picasso. It was 2 points.
Yeah.
Right? And that's really just kind of moving along here and putting some pressure on the Panthers, putting some pressure on Toronto to kind of stay pace with the Lightning, knowing that they have, at least with Florida, a couple of games in hand. And, here we are. Didn't play well, but pretty good defensive effort in terms of what they allowed, which wasn't anything last night, which I think continues to be an interesting theme for this Lightning team defensively. They can win ugly. And I think it's a really good sign, partner, heading into the stretch run here and into the playoffs.
Well, for our listeners who caught the show yesterday, what I was saying was it is unreasonable to expect that the Lightning will have another game like they had in Boston where their best defense was just having the puck all night. So I was wondering, how would they do when they didn't have the puck? How would they do against a Philadelphia team that did break them down off the rush last week in Philadelphia? And I think the answer to the first question was they actually did pretty well. Answer to the second question, they didn't do quite so well. Flyers had a lot of rush chances last night, but they got nothing out of them.
Right.
So let me start with a positive first, because I think there was a positive last night, which was they weren't at their best. They were fighting it all night. But when you look at the score sheet at the end of the night, goals against 0, shots were, 21? Attempts were 49. Those are, 0 is very low for goals against, but the shots on goal and the attempts against were both low as well. So on a night, which was like the polar opposite in a way, maybe not polar opposite, because it's not like the Flyers had as much possession as the Lightning had on Saturday against the Bruins, but the Flyers had way more possession than the Bruins did. There's no question. And so the Lightning were kind of put to the test in the way that I was wondering on the show yesterday. How would the Lightning handle having to play a good portion of the game without the puck, where they weren't having those long, extended offensive zone shifts? And I think for the most part, they did pretty well. The two areas where they had problems defensively, number one, Philly did break them down off the rush. There were probably no less than 6 to 7 odd mans in the game, and there were reasons why the Flyers didn't convert on any of them. And then the other part was the Flyers had a very good first power play. Penalty killing was a key to the Lightning's win last night. But the first kill that they had was more about Vasilevskiy and less about the penalty killers. Flyers had 5 shots in the game on the power play, and all 5 came on their first power play chance. They had 4 more after that. One of them was shortened. But they had 6 minutes in the second period. They had no shots. So the first penalty kill for the Lightning, they gave up chances. So when you're looking at, like, what did they give up? On a night where they were fighting the puck, they didn't execute very well with the puck. Coop's right. They turned it over again and again and again and again. And we can get into why that happened. But when you're having a game like that, how are you going to deal with it? And other than the fact that the Lightning got broken down off the rush and they had a subpar, I would call it, first penalty kill where they leaned on Vasilevskiy a lot, I'm not sure the Flyers got much. And that's a credit to how the Lightning were able to play that game without the puck. I thought that was probably the biggest reason why they were able to win. That on a night when they were forced to play without the puck a lot, they didn't actually give up much. That's how you get an ugly win. That's basically the formula for an ugly win. And Kuch made a play. Kuch made a play. I mean, he had a breakaway, he scored on it. Owen Tippett had a breakaway. Tippett's a good player. Tippett has scored on 2 shootout attempts against the Lightning this year. He can score on breakaways. He didn't score. So, the Lightning got the goal near the end of the first. In Eric's article, if the fans happen to read it, Eric is right. He drew a comparison with the first meeting between the teams back in November. Kucherov scored late first in both games. Lightning had a 1-0 lead into the third period late in both games. In the first game, the Flyers tied it, ended up winning in a shootout. Last night, the Lightning shut the door. And I agree with Coop that the third period I thought was their best period. They played a little bit more on their toes. But we can get into kind of why the Lightning were fighting it. We can get into kind of the other parts of the game, whether it was why were they giving up rush chances, what do they do well in the penalty kill in the second period. I mean, there were other elements to this win, but to me the biggest takeaway was the Lightning get high marks for how they defended without the puck, even as they were giving up way too many odd mans. But that's been a familiar theme in these 2 games against the Flyers. Flyers have had success generating those against the Lightning. It happened again last night, but the Lightning weren't hurt by it, unlike in the game last week in Philly.
The power play for Philadelphia failed them, but I think you could probably look at that and say the Lightning did a nice job on the PK.
Right,
And
after the first one.
After the first one. And listen,
Yeah.
Vasilevskiy was fantastic when he needed
Yeah.
to be. Kind of a theme, a little bit, even against the Boston team over the weekend, partner, when maybe in the first period, first 10 minutes, Boston had some looks, and Vasi maybe at the time was a lot better. And, obviously we know what the Lightning were able to do later in that game, particularly in the second period. But I thought, the puck, for whatever reason, players were fighting it last night. And do you want to give credit to the Flyers for how well they played? Do you want to say it was an off night for the Lightning? Probably a little bit of both. That's the politically correct answer. I mean, the shots on goal for both teams total was, 44?
Yeah.
And, that's not a great game. I mean, you had single-digit shots for the Flyers in every period. And I know Vasi is a high-volume, puck-saving goaltender. He likes to see as much rubber as possible. But I think, if you're only seeing 21 shots, the chances of you coming out victorious with him in net is probably greater.
Yeah.
I know the Flyers don't have a ton of finishers, and we understand that. They're kind of in a rebuilding/retooling mode, and that's fine. But this is a game where I think it's okay to say you won ugly, because I think finding different ways to win has been a theme for this team. And I think that's going to serve them well heading into the playoffs. So I thought Vasi was good. I thought he was good, especially early on in that first power play. What did he face? 5 shots?
Mm-hmm.
There's some really good chances. And he was Johnny on the spot in a lot of those. And I think his play this year has been elite, and I think he's, 5 shutouts this year, 39 for his career. So I think he's in a spot where the Lightning should feel pretty good about, where he is right now. And I thought last night was probably a perfect example of that, where Lightning didn't play great, got enough, didn't chase the third goal, and, just decided maybe to let's do our best to not prevent the next one from the Flyers, and I think they did that. And I think John Cooper, while it was ugly, there are some positives you can take from a game like this. And as I said before, most notably, getting the 2 points and putting some more pressure back on Florida.
Yeah, they got the 2 points. They kept pace with Toronto, which snapped a little bit of a losing streak there with a pretty decisive win at home against Calgary. I mean, Coop said it, the Lightning simplified their game in the third period, which I think helped because when you're not executing tape-to-tape passes, sometimes chipping it out is just, that's what he really means by simplifying and just go get it. I think that the 4-minute kill in some ways helped the Lightning raise their level. So, look, when they lost to Boston at home, we called them out. They called themselves out. Like, their effort level wasn't where it needed to be. I don't think last night was an effort level. I think...
You said they were slow.
Yeah,
right?
I think they were trying. I think they were digging for something that just wasn't there. Right? I think the will was there, but... Or was they say, like, the mind was there, the body wasn't, in a way. Like, I think that they were really trying, but look, there may be something to, like, 3-game road trip plus a travel day. You're playing. It's almost like you didn't unpack the suitcase. They're going right back on the road. And the Flyers, I thought, had a little more pep. I mean, the Flyers are coming off an embarrassing home loss, an embarrassing home stand, where they went 1-6, 6 regulation losses. You got a 7-game homestand. They entered that homestand still with playoff aspirations, and they blew it. They blew it, and they got embarrassed in their last game by Carolina. They lost at home 5-0. So you kind of figured that they would have a fire lit under them, and I think they did, to the extent that they had a little bit more jump than the Lightning. And then the Lightning were trying, but they were playing a little slow. They were thinking a little slow. They were fighting the puck. We keep saying that. In fact, Steve sent me a question from a fan. I should look it up and see exactly how that was phrased. Listener question. Is there a cure for fumbleitis? That was the name. I'm not reading the whole. It was from Glenn. So thank you, Glenn. Bobbleitis, otherwise known as. So I don't know if there is a cure for fumbleitis. The problem with fumbleitis, though, is that it seems to be contagious because when a couple of players on the team get fumbleitis, it seems like everybody gets fumbleitis. And what is fumbleitis? It's like the puck is there, it's on your stick, and it's just not settled, right?
We call it a grenade sometimes.
Yeah, it's bouncing. Like, that slows your game down. I mean, Chief tells this great story about, I think he was broadcasting at the time, but he saw the old Minnesota North Stars play.
Yeah.
And I think Bob Gainey was the GM, and Chief knew Bob Gainey. And he said, boy, your team looks so fast. And Bob Gainey's response was, it's not that we actually have fast players, we just pass the puck really well. So if you're crisp in your execution, you play fast. If you have fumbleitis, it's going to slow you down. So I think that all of this factored in to them not playing at the pace that is probably required. And they were facing a team that was ticked off and on them. I mean, the Flyers deserve credit. You mentioned, like, do we give credit to the Flyers? Yeah. I mean, the Flyers were on them. But when the Flyers got the puck, what did the Flyers do with the puck? And that's where I kind of go back to, I think the Lightning handled their business much better without the puck than they did with the puck. So is this going to linger? You hope not. I mean, I think that this game on Thursday against Dallas, first of all, they get a couple of days. Today's an off day, completely an off day. No practice, no travel, nothing. Rest, right? Tomorrow they'll have a practice in the morning, fly to Dallas. It's not a long flight, couple of hours. Will gain an hour, and then they'll face one of the best teams in the NHL that is battling for playoff position, certainly, but they're probably not going to catch Winnipeg, so it's about home ice in the first round, and I think the Stars are looking to hone their game. They have a good team, though, and they just acquired Mikko Rantanen, as we know. So that'll be a very stiff test, honestly, for the Lightning. And you like to see that they've shaken off whatever was bothering them and affecting their game last night. But, these things come and go. They certainly didn't have fumbleitis on Saturday against the Bruins. They were very, very crisp in their execution. So we'll see. That is my way of trying to explain why the Lightning were, as we keep saying, fighting the puck as they were yesterday. And I think it helped the Flyers, but the Flyers also had a vote. I mean, the Flyers were positionally sound. They were jumping on pucks when the Lightning were fighting them a little bit. I think they pressured too, like even just a D-to-D pass. There was a Flyer lurking in the offensive zone, and the Lightning just didn't handle it as well as probably they could have. But they got away with it. So that is my way of trying to explain what happened to them with the puck. Now, what happened on these rush chances? Sometimes rush chances happen when you turn the puck over, or you yourself have a rush chance and you don't do what you're supposed to with the puck and you're feeding the other team's attack. I think for the most part, though, in the 2 games the Lightning had against the Flyers in the past week, when the Flyers have generated a fair number of rush chances, it has been more about lack of awareness and less about turnovers. Now, I'm not saying that every rush chance the Flyers had last night was due to lack of awareness. Sometimes the Lightning did have a turnover and the Flyers countered. But I feel like from what I'm seeing, like a guy is getting caught a little bit down low and the player who might be covering for him isn't quite where he needs to be, or the Flyers get it. It was kind of like that Pastrnak play when we were talking about what happened with him in that Boston game. Like the Bruins blocked a shot, Pastrnak is gone, right? And they set him up for a breakaway. McDonough broke up the breakaway. But the Flyers were looking to attack as soon as they got the puck in their own zone. And the Lightning, like, it was just part of this slow theme. Like, they were just not quite reacting quickly enough. And these weren't always clean 2-on-1s. They were mostly 2-on-1s. They weren't always clean 2-on-1s. There was a second Lightning defender trying to get back. But it was a 2-on-1. So, and then there was the Tippett breakaway. That was certainly an odd man chance where the puck got floated into the zone and he got to it first, had a breakaway in the second period. So that was a Vasilevskiy save. Vasilevskiy did make some saves on these odd mans. The Tippett one was the hardest one because that was a clean breakaway. Tyson Foerster, Phil was really impressed with this guy. I'm not sure if Foerster has jumped out at Phil as much in other games between the Lightning and Flyers, and Foerster played in that first meeting in November, and Phil did the game. Phil liked him a lot, and he had a chance on a 2-on-1 in the first period where he snapped the puck quickly. Phil was impressed with how quickly he got the shot away. It was off a pass. Hagel was the guy trying to come back, and because Hagel was hustling, Foerster had to shoot quickly. And Vasi got over and made the save. But on a number of the other chances, the Lightning defender might have broken up the play. The Flyers tried to make a pass, and it didn't quite connect. And then there was the one in the third period. I mean, the Lightning did play better in the third period, but I don't know how much time was left, but it was definitely like under 7 minutes, maybe under 6 minutes, 5 minutes or so. Konechny gets a 2-on-1. I mean, it is a clean 2-on-1. There is not a Lightning player other than the one defenseman anywhere close. And Konechny's a righty. He's on the left side of the ice, and he decides to shoot. Which, look, that's not a bad play because he has a better angle. The guy who was with him was also a righty, and he missed the net. That was the Flyers' last best chance, but troubling if you're the Lightning that you're giving up a 2-on-1 when you're up 1-0 in the third period with, let's just say, single-digit minutes on the clock. That was not great for the Lightning, but they got through it. How did they get through it? Vasi made a couple of saves.
Yep.
They hustled back when they could, kind of maybe rushed some plays, disrupted plays a little bit. Flyers didn't quite execute. Like, they got the 2-on-1, pass across, didn't quite lead to a chance. So it was kind of like, pick a story, right? Like, there was a different outcome for every one of these rushes. Sometimes it was a save, sometimes it was a miss, sometimes it was a disruption, sometimes there was no shot because the pass was a little offline. but there were way too many odd mans against if you're the Lightning. And I think some of that, again, fed into this narrative of they just weren't thinking and reacting and skating quickly enough to stop what the Flyers were throwing at them. But when the Flyers had the puck in the offensive zone and were just possessing it, the Lightning were not having big breakdowns in front, which is why the Flyers only had 21 shots in the game. And not a lot of, like, other than their rush chances and that one power play, they really didn't have a lot of even moderately dangerous chances in the game. So that area, the Lightning did quite well. It's just that kind of when they had to move, right, they had to think kind of the length of the ice, the Flyers were able to get some looks off the rush. And the Lightning had some looks off the rush, too, more so in the third period. I mean, Kucherov had the breakaway when Konechny fumbled the puck, but Hagel had a breakaway in the third period, and the Lightning had some rush chances of their own that also did not yield much. Like, I remember Kucherov passed a point at one point. It might have nicked off a stick, sailed over point stick. It was just one of those games. So it was a weird game in that we had these rush chances, but it was a low-scoring game and a low-shot game at the same time.
I thought the Flyers got good goaltending in there.
Yeah, Fedotov has played well
Fedotov
against the
was good.
Lightning in his two starts.
It was interesting reading some of the quotes coming out of the Flyers camp. Tortorella said, quote, "We were patient, something we needed to be. I thought Fedotov played very well. The goaltending was good. I thought we played hard. I thought we checked really well, and the patience level was good. We just needed someone to score a goal."
Yeah, they were missing some finish.
You know?
When you get 5 to 6 odd mans and you come away empty, that's tough. But they didn't get much else. And we didn't talk about the 6 minutes of power play time they had in the second period in which they didn't score and they had no shots. And as good as their power play looked in the first period, that was a little surprising. There was one play around the net where Michkov, he's a good player too, but Michkov was lurking at the post and Vasi kind of had the puck underneath him. That might have been their most dangerous look. It didn't count as a shot because I think the puck just kind of slid to Vasilevskiy. It wasn't really an attempt, and he had it underneath him. But the Lightning deserve high marks and get high marks for how they handled those 6 minutes and the 4 minutes in a row. And they had chances. Glendening at the post shorthanded. Hedman had a couple of shorthanded looks. One in the first, one in the second.
He missed the net. I
Yeah.
feel like he missed the net a couple of times.
He missed
right?
the net. Yep. But the Lightning finished with 2 shorthanded shots on net. One was from Gergensons, for sure. I think Nick Paul might have had the other.
Yeah.
But the Lightning did well to get through the 3 kills in the second period and protect their lead.
Thought they got a little juice killing off the 4 minute.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I think that helped there. It got them dialed in a little bit more.
Yeah.
A little bit more.
And I'm okay. Like, I know some people are going to say, look, the totality of that game wasn't their best, and they need to have a better effort, more like what we saw in Boston. But I think you and I have talked about the games fluctuate, and I think a lot of it is the opponent. If that's the Dallas Stars at home, are the Lightning ready to go differently than against the Flyers? I just think that's human nature, and the key for that is to make sure you're not developing bad habits and you come out with a win. They did. Now, what does that mean for the game coming up here in a couple of days against Dallas? That's a whole different animal. That is a whole different animal. Dallas is, if not the best team in the league, you can make the case, top 5, top 6. I like their team a lot. I think they're one of those teams that you talk about that next wave of franchises who have been close to winning a cup with certain players, and I think they're right there. And they've added. And so I anticipate the Lightning being ready for that game, but you also understand what we've seen recently, playing defense, specifically, playing with the puck. Those are going to be magnified, I think, a little bit more, maybe a lot more, when you go against a team like the Stars, who they don't have a ton of weaknesses.
They're a very deep team because they're strong in all of their positions. Right. I mean, Heiskanen's been out a while, but I'm presuming, I actually don't even know how much longer he's going to be out, but I'm presuming he's going to be back at some point. He's the anchor of their defense. Right. We talked about it, that 2017 draft for Dallas. They got Ottinger, they got Heiskanen. Heiskanen they took first, but they got him, Heiskanen, they got Ottinger and Jason Robertson, all in the same draft. 3 different positions, and 3 of their best players. 3 of the best players in the NHL. I mean, that is one heck of a draft.
Heck of a draft.
But they also have Rope Hintz.
Yeah.
Wyatt Johnston has turned into a really effective player. Has some offensive pop. Matt Duchene looks like he's still chugging along at a pretty high level.
Still produces, doesn't he?
Right? Yeah. Yeah, very good player. And I think Ottinger needs to win a cup to reach kind of, maybe not win a cup, but, the Stars have gone fairly deep in the playoffs for a couple of years with Ottinger in net. Ottinger is in the same category as some of the other top goalies in the NHL, not just because he's a very good goalie, but because he plays a lot. So he's in the Vasilevskiy, Shesterkin, Hellebuck camp, right? Like there's no dispute. There's no 1A, 1B in Dallas. It's Ottinger's net, and he plays 3 out of every 4 games, basically. So that's a luxury for the Stars. They have a very good team.
Robertson's fantastic.
Yeah, I didn't even mention him, right? Well, I did that he was taken in that 2017 draft, but
he's just fantastic.
And now they have Rantanen.
Yeah. What's interesting, and I think, is the jury still out on a Rantanen fitting in there, and we'll see. I mean, there's been a lot of speculation on how everything went down from Colorado to Carolina and then to Dallas. But, again, it's kind of the old guard into the new guard. And the Lightning have done this, although their old guard is still relatively young. The Stars kind of went through the Sagan-Ben era, and they transitioned to some of these younger guys. But those guys have been pretty productive. I mean, Jamie Benn's got 16 goals this year. Partner.
Yeah.
1 goal away from 400.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
I'm just looking at his career numbers here.
Yeah.
But, he's a guy, he has played some hard minutes.
Well, he and Ovechkin are not the same. Ovechkin clearly is approaching the Gretzky record. But the similarities I see, there are similarities between those 2 players. Both players are having better than maybe expected offensive seasons.
Yeah.
I mean, let's remember, halfway through last year, Ovechkin was in single-digit goals. And I think the question, which was a fair one, was like, is this the end of the road? Like, is he just going to keep playing until he can get to the Gretzky record? And how many years is that going to take if he's barely managing to get to like 10, 11 goals a year? This year he's eclipsing 30, and, he's poised to break the record before the regular season ends. Jamie Benn had a few years where, it looked like he wasn't the same guy, honestly, because he does have a lot of hard miles on him. And the Stars are a little different because they've been a good team. The Caps have really elevated this year. But, when you're playing on a good team, you do tend to get more opportunities to put the puck in the net.
Sure.
You do. I mean, I don't know if he's out on the 5-on-6. Like Ovechkin's gotten some goals, into empty nets. And because the Caps have had such a good year, they're often up late in the game. The Stars are in the same boat. Teams that win a lot get lots of chances to score empty net goals. And they just score more than they're allowing, right?
Right.
So I'm not shocked that Jamie Benn's having a pretty good year based on where the Stars are in the standings.
It's stating the obvious. Rantanen really has a chance to dial that team up even more offensively if he kind of gets back to, what... And he's almost a 30-goal scorer. But, this is a guy who was coming off 50-plus goals a couple of years ago. He can be really a difference maker for them, of course.
How weird of a first-round series would that be if Dallas plays Colorado for Mikko Rantanen and for the Avalanche?
For sure. That would be must-watch television.
Yeah.
I think if you're a hockey fan, I think you want to put that on. And I think you feel pretty good. But think about some of the depth scoring for them, because we talk about this with the Lightning. McGranlund, who's kind of had a little bit of a resurgence.
That was an early trade.
Early trade
that the Stars made with San Jose.
But I got to tell you, when he was with Pittsburgh, he was not anywhere close.
But
to where he
was playing pretty well with San Jose. I'm not surprised that somebody went out and got him.
They got
Cody Ceci too, didn't they?
Yeah. He found himself, and now you're not asking him to be in the top 6. Although I'm curious to see where they have him playing this year. Dadonov. When he was with Florida, he was a pretty good player, right? An older guy, but if you're having him again, I have to see where they slot him. But if he's in kind of a third line role where he can chip in here and there, he's got enough offensive punch to be a threat. And so I feel like the Stars, who sometimes have been top heavy, have found maybe some guys who can slide in. I mean, Marchman's got 16 goals.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's pretty impressive. And I think he goes under the radar. He's not a role player, obviously. I think when you start talking about best players at his position, Heiskanen, maybe because he's in the West and is not talked about as much here. But there's Makar and what he can do. In terms of the tools in the toolbox, Heiskanen, I think, is just as good. Not on Makar's level, but he's a horseback there, partner. I mean, he can fly, and he's got a really good shot. And I don't know where people have him when it comes to best defenseman in the game. And I think when we say that, obviously, it's a lot more about the offense than the defense. But, I mean, would you put him in your top 5?
Yep.
I probably would, right?
Yeah.
And even if you wanted to narrow that gap to the top 3, that guy's a hell of a player.
He's not as much of a point producer as the other top defensemen, but he is a very, very solid all-around defenseman who can produce.
Yep.
I mean, Harley is actually their highest point defenseman. I'm looking at the roster right now. He kind of came out of nowhere. I remember seeing him, I think it was last year, and kind of making a note like, this guy's a pretty good player. And now he's playing over 23 minutes a game. He's got 39 points, and he's plus 23. And you might say, wow, the Stars are a good team. Well, yes, but plus 23 is second on the Stars to Esa Lindell, who's at plus 31. So, I mean, even on a team that has done well, Harley has the second best plus minus on this team. So, look, it's going to be a good test for the Lightning. I think it goes without saying. They're going to need to play better than they did against Philadelphia. But there's no reason to believe that they're not going to be able to do it.
Yep.
Stars, by the way, play tonight.
Correct.
So they host Anaheim. A little bit of a homestand, 4-game homestand. Starts tonight.
Big game. It's going to be a fun game. Those are ones you like to call. Do we want to get to some questions here?
Yeah. Well, actually, let me
What do we
finish reading that question about the
Please do.
fumbleitis because I didn't read the whole thing.
Fumbleia.
I'm reading this for the first time because I just saw Steve's question forward. Is there a cure for fumbleitis? This is from Glenn. I enjoy power lunch as often as I can. Observation in question. The Lightning are an exceptionally skilled team whose temporary lapses hold them back from their potential. The most glaring evidence on evenings when the Lightning are off their game is fumbleitis, otherwise known as bobbleitis. Can't get out of their own zone cleanly, can't connect cleanly on passes while heading up ice on the offensive rush. What is the cause? Is there a cure? Yeah, so I guess we kind of touched on this. I don't know what the cause is, except that, I mean, look, fatigue can play a role. And sometimes it's mental fatigue, sometimes it's physical fatigue. I hesitate to use the word fatigue to describe the Lightning's game. I just think that they were not operating as quickly as they needed to, and some of that may have affected how they handled the puck, and how they handled the puck affected how slowly they were forced to play and allowed the Flyers to get in on them quickly. Is there a cure? Well, sometimes teams can kind of snap out of it. I'm not sure the Lightning did completely last night, but their third period was better in that regard, certainly, and overall, I think, than the first two. And usually by the next game, it's not really an issue anymore.
I would agree with that. 100%.
Thanks for the comment, Glenn.
Yeah, we appreciate everybody who weighs in. I do want to get to a few here that were trickling in. Who do we start with? Let's start with Basil. Why don't we start with Basil? That connecting a 2-on-1 in the third is a great example of when shooting is a bad play. The Bolts were really vulnerable there. A shot from Konecny was a gift. Vasi handled it easily. A pass across the open man would have made Vasi move and broken down the D.
So
Thoughts
I
there, Paul?
talked about this, Basil. I actually don't think it was a terrible play. Well, so first of all, Konecny is their highest goal scorer, even though he's been in a horrific slump. I think he has 1 goal since mid-January. But nonetheless, he's on a 2-on-1. I think it was Tippett with him. So the argument against passing is that Tippett was on the right side of the ice, and he is a right-handed shooting player. Konecny was on the left side of the ice as a right-handed shooting player. So Basil is right that getting the pass across forces the goaltender to move. And that can create an open part of the net for the shooter if the pass gets across. But Konecny actually had a better angle to the net to shoot because he's on his off wing. And he was picking the corner and missed. What I didn't mind the shot, actually, Basil. Like if I'm putting on my Philadelphia hat, what I might say is maybe get a little closer to the net and, make it a shorter shot, right? He didn't. He kind of shot a little bit more from distance. I never saw a replay on it, so I'm just going off my own memory of seeing it live. But it was a break for the Lightning. He missed the net, so there was no shot on net. There was no save required from Vasilevskiy. Hindsight's 20/20.
Yeah, for sure.
If you try and make the pass, it might get disrupted by the one defenseman. Tippett might fumble the puck. Tippett might get the puck, but again, he's a righty on the right side. His angle is not as good. Maybe Vasi gets over, right? That's hard to one-time a pass like that. I mean, it can be done, but because you have to wait for the puck to pass your body before it reaches your stick blade. So that was the choice the Flyers made. Didn't work out.
Baz also says, I don't watch the Flyers to know if it's just against us, but Owen Tippett seems like a world beater whenever we play them. He scored against us for the Panthers in the playoffs. Now he seems dangerous all the time for the Flyers.
Tippett's one of their better players.
He's a good player.
Yeah, he's a good player. I don't know enough about the Flyers to be able to dissect like what is wrong with their team, but I will say this. Until they hit this homestand, they were very much in the mix to get into the wild card. Phil feels like they need a center. That's what he said. They need a center. He's like, Couturier is a good player, but, I mean, he's been around for a while. He's also had a lot of injury problems. And was Noah Cates undrafted? I mean, not that there's anything wrong with being an undrafted player, but, I mean, honestly, Noah Cates is their second-line center, if you will, and probably should be in a bottom 6. I mean, he's a good player, but look at his numbers, right? So I'm just kind of echoing what Phil was saying. Maybe that's part of what they need. I think their decor looks good, though. I mean, honestly, and they're still without Ristolainen. I shouldn't say still without, like he's been in and out of the lineup, but York and Sanheim are good players. Sanheim has really had kind of a breakthrough year, played in the Four Nations. They got Drysdale in the trade with Anaheim for Cutter Gauthier. Sealer has turned into definitely a top 4. He's among the league leaders in block shots. The Flyers love this guy. Yeah. He's a really solid defenseman. Those are your top 4.
What do you make of Konecny long-term for them? Do you think he's a guy they just build around, or do you think he's a guy that eventually, to get better quicker, could you, if you needed to move him and get even more pieces, by the time they're really ready to compete? I don't know. He's a good player.
Yeah.
I like him a lot. And I think he was on Four Nations, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was.
And so, I mean,
I think he was one of those guys that was right on the cusp.
Yeah,
Again,
right.
We didn't follow that closely.
Right.
I'm not sure if he played all 4 games for Canada. He was in some. He was not in some. So, Konecny has had a good career so far. He reminds me, and they aren't carbon copies, but he reminds me of this player, and they wear the same number, and they're both righties. And they both are kind of the same size, so maybe that's why I'm making this comparison. He reminds me a little bit of Gallagher in Montreal. And what we've seen from Gallagher, not quite the same. I think Konecny, I would have to go back and look at their comparable numbers. Gallagher was able to score a lot because he went to dirty areas when he was younger, earlier in his career. And he was a very effective player at doing that. I think Konechny has probably a little bit more in his toolbox to be able to score from distance. Like, he has scored from that spot on the ice before. Remember when the Lightning played in Montreal recently and Gallagher scored 2 goals kind of from distance? And I was like, I don't really remember seeing Gallagher score from there even when he was, younger. Usually it's like at the top of the paint, mucking it up, rebounds, being a pain in the rear end for the other team. Like, he's been a very effective player in that role for Montreal. But when you are an undersized, I'll use that word, guy playing that sort of game, it's hard to maintain that. And we've seen his game. I mean, his offensive production has dropped off significantly. Gallagher in the last couple of years. Is that what's going to be in store for Konechny? I don't know. I don't know the situation well enough. It's very possible Konechny has, 8, 9 more years of playing exactly the same way that he has been playing. And clearly he had a good first half of the year because he was over 20 goals. He's at 22. And I think I mentioned he has 1 goal since mid-January. So he is in a huge slump. And it's also that he doesn't have a lot of support. So, I mean, the Flyers don't score a lot. That's an area of their team that has been a little bit of a problem area, even though we talked about Forster and Tippett and Michkov's third among rookies in scoring. But you look at their team as a whole, it feels like Konechny has to do a lot of the heavy lifting himself.
And
that's just a lot. It's a lot for him.
And I don't know if he's the type of player, and I'm going to give you this comparison more from the perspective of, is he a star or a really good player? Because they're around the same age. Dylan Larkin's, I think, a year or 2 older than him. And you may say Dylan Larkin is a better offensive player than Konechny. What I would simply say is, I think they're both really good players. I don't know if they're star players. And it's not a bad thing. It's not, you can win with those guys. But I feel like Larkin's been the face of Detroit for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're trying to find their way to a degree. And, there's been some questions. Is he the star player that every team needs offensively? I think Konechny is that guy probably for the Flyers. And I just think they fall into that category of really good but not special. They have some special attributes. But that's why I simply suggested when the Flyers become very competitive, is he somebody you could flip for some prospects or some ready-to-go NHLers to maybe balance out your team until you get somebody who really is the go-to guy? The Claude Giroux, when Philadelphia had him, that you looked at and said, that's a pretty star player, and I feel like both of those teams lack that pop, and maybe that's going to prevent them from, I think in Detroit's case, maybe getting into the playoffs. We'll see, how it plays out. They're certainly on the cusp, and I think they've gotten some contributions from some other players this year that have helped. And how often have we talked about Detroit kind of in the middle of no man's land, kind of with their roster?
But Detroit has popped this year. I mean,
they do this
whether
year.
It's that they got Kane.
They do.
Raymond has evolved into. I mean, the Red Wings have way more offensive pop than the Flyers, and the Red Wings' power play is very dangerous. I'm looking at the Flyers' power play percentage. Entering last night, it was 30th in the NHL. They were on an 0 for 19 stretch, and now it's 0 for 24. And even though they look good in their first power play, like if you're kind of challenged offensively anyway, probably means your power play is not going to be a top half power play, but you can help yourself if you struggle to score goals 5-on-5 with a good power play, and the Flyers haven't had that this year either. I think they have some interesting pieces, though. Michkov is going to be, he is their most dynamic player. You could see it. Just, he's got that Russian flair, right? He can stick handle, he finds space. His instincts, his offensive instincts are terrific. Torts has benched him a few times, and usually with much hullabaloo. And he's a young player, and this is part of the process, basically, which is Torts speak for, I need him to be more responsible in other areas of the game is my guess. And he'll get there. Like, you know, he's a young pup, and the Flyers have a really, really good player there.
Yeah.
But they don't have a lot of those guys at this point. And the question in net, like, Fedotov has played well against the Lightning, but his overall numbers are not great. And is Ersson the guy? I remember it was going to be Carter Hart. Carter Hart was going to be their guy. And Carter Hart started struggling a little bit and then got, you know, obviously
There's some issues there. And
implicated in the World Junior scandal. So the Flyers have had to go back to the drawing board. So I don't know if they necessarily have their long-term answer in net, even though Ersson was on the Four Nations team for Sweden. And they probably need another game breaker or two if they can find a game breaker. I don't know what they have in terms of what's coming down the pike in the draft to join Michkov. And maybe some other good offensive players like Tippett and Forster are good offensive players. But I like their decor. I think their decor is very, very solid. And they're young, right? All of them are young. I mean, Sanheim's kind of, other than Ristolainen, but Sanheim is probably the most veteran of the bunch. So Sealer is not young either, but Sealer is rock solid. Like, he's in the prime of his career. So maybe they build off of that.
I think it's fair. I think that's all appropriate when you talk about particularly the goaltending. I think is also something they got to get right, because you're not going to be competitive or win a cup if you're not sure who you have. Al says, are the Lightning too aggressive at times in the neutral zone and O zones and are trying to be too fancy, which puts them out of position, causing turnovers and on-man rushes? Thoughts? What a sloppy, lazy play hockey game.
Well, I would say this, Al. Sometimes
I don't think they were lazy.
Well, we're right. Yeah, but he was asking about being too aggressive.
Right.
Sometimes. What was the quote that Vasilevskiy had? Asking about, like, locking things down in the third period, and he basically said, you know, he didn't say this, I'm paraphrasing, but he's like, we're not sniffing for offense as much as we did in other years. Maybe a little. Like, Vasi is incapable of not being honest, I think, when the microphone is in front of him. He's like, we're not doing it as much, maybe a little bit. So I think that, like, the needle has moved more in the other direction away from what Al is saying. But yeah, sometimes they're guilty of that.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be where they are defensively, Al, this year if that was a big-time problem. They've had a good defensive year. You're going to make mistakes in the sport of hockey. It is a game of mistakes. The game is played at too fast of a speed. Too many decisions have to be made for a team to have, like, a clean sheet, right? No mistakes. Mistakes are going to happen. Sometimes they're born from being over-aggressive, which is what Al is talking about. I don't think that has been, to kind of paraphrase Vasi, as big of a problem this year as it has been in other years.
I would agree with that, for sure. Let's get to some more questions here. This one coming from Thomas. The lads were battling the puck all night, cursed with brutal puck luck as it danced about. Still, Andrus Mack bias guarded the net like a leprechaun with his gold. Off on the road again now. May Lady Luck shine on him. Obviously, a lot of St. Patty Day references there. Yes,
Who
they
was
were
dancing around the net? I didn't understand.
I'll be the first one. I'll text you.
You need a translation.
I'm like, huh? And then that's okay. I'm gonna text you and the boys here, and you can read it, Mish, because you're much better when it comes to that as well.
It's hard to decipher live on the air.
Yeah, you know, I'm reading it for the first time, and there we go. I just texted you. It'll come through. But yes, they were a bit off, Thomas. Don't you know? And you know, we kind of.
Yeah, I don't know what this means.
Is that
how it was spelled?
Yeah, I just copy and pasted.
Andreas Macbaeus.
Yeah, guarded the net like a leprechaun with his gold.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe he's talking about Vasilevskiy.
I guess. I don't know.
Vasi likes guarding the net like a leprechaun. I like that.
Like
metaphor. I guess that would be a simile,
Why-
right? Because he
that's-
said like.
Can you give me just like who the Lucky Charms character, Lucky, and just do that, and I think we can all appreciate that, Thomas. But I appreciate Thomas and his participation. Anthony says defensive awareness is back, not championship level, but good enough. I think when this team struggles to score, overpassing is the obvious problem, but also they just don't shoot 5-hole enough. It's the second best shot placement to score. It keeps goalies honest. I don't know. Is it the second best place to score?
I don't know where he's getting that. I mean, look,
according to
you
the
can try to
conversation-
shoot 5-hole. The goalie stick is there, though.
Would
And
you
depending
say?
on how quickly the goalie goes down in the butterfly, there may be nothing there.
but would
You have to shoot
say
quickly to get it through the 5-hole.
that is correct? I would say you're always shoot high. To me, would be the first. But then, who did you speak to
Franz, John.
about where
Yeah.
now goaltenders might be vulnerable?
So
and
if you're aiming for the 5-hole, you are not going to miss the net. Like it's the middle of the net. It's
That is
along the
correct.
ice, right? So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe he has data to back up what he's saying. It's the second most likely place to score, but that is factoring in other areas where it may be harder to find the spot, right? So what Franz was saying, goalies go down to the butterfly. So when they are fully in the butterfly, you can imagine, the two pads are along the ice, horizontal to the ice basically, and flat, taking away the whole lower part of the net. So that is why the upper part of the net, over the right shoulder, over the left shoulder, can be open, depending on the goalie's positioning. How deep is he in the crease? But if you're going to lift it, you got to place it. You got to make sure that you're getting it over the shoulder and under the bar. That can be a tricky shot. What Franz was saying is 2 new holes. I don't know how new they are, but he's saying like we used to have the 5-hole is the between the pads. That's because there are 4 other holes, right? This is the 5th hole. Now he's like, there's a 6-hole and the 7-hole, and it's the area above the pad when the goalie is down in the butterfly, below the glove on one side, below the blocker on the other. We've seen players score from there. It's a tricky save for the goalie because if he's down in the butterfly, it's not top of the net. It's above where the pad is. So it's going to miss the pad, and you have to react with your glove or your stick hand to make sure that it's covering that area above the pad. I mean, it's not an unstoppable shot, but it can be a tricky one, particularly if there's a screen. I don't know where that ranks in terms of the most likely place to score. The argument about going 5-hole is if you can shoot it quickly, you do know it's going to be on net. And when goalies go down to the butterfly, there is that time when they're up on their skates before they reach the ice where there's an opening there. But the stick is protecting the area along the ice. So unless it deflects off the stick and goes through the pads, the stick is in the way. So you have to get it over the stick, but below the area where there's an opening in that 5-hole. Scoring goals is not easy. Kucherov's goal, that was what a shot. I mean, that was in the top of the net before Fedotov could even react.
Isn't it interesting, the 2 different breakaways? Cooch goes top shelf, but maybe to Anthony's point, Hagel looked like he tried
Hagel was going for that spot.
He tried to go
but
maybe
Fedotov's glove was there.
Right, yeah.
And basically went right into the glove.
You know what ends up happening? I'll say this. When you try to go 5-hole, it actually looks, because I feel like you're threading the needle. If you miss just a little bit, it looks like you're shooting into the belly of the goaltender.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, at least you try to go top shelf. If you miss, some guys just miss completely. Maybe it hits the crossbar. You can kind of tell where they're picking their spots. I feel like there's not much chance to... The margins, I think, are smaller when you go 5-hole. And if you miss 5-hole, it just looks like you were shooting into the belly.
Yeah.
And that's it. So...
Miss high 5-hole.
Yeah, for sure.
If you go too high, yeah.
Right. So it's an interesting observation, and I have never really thought the 5-hole was the second most whatever he phrased it, dangerous spot for shooters when they're looking at a goaltender or trying to score goals. But, I will tell you this. Chief will tell you on breakaways, because I did ask him. I said, you played the position. I'm always curious, when you see a breakaway, what's going through the goaltender's mind, and then where do you think the player can be most effective on a breakaway? And I think Phil talks about this too, especially when you see the shootouts, coming with speed.
Mm-hmm.
I think both say when you come with speed, you're backing the goaltender off. Because if the goaltender can get on top of his crease, maybe he's cutting down the angles there. But if you come at him fast, maybe you're backing up a little bit and you get him to move. And then all of a sudden you have it up. Look, easier said than done.
Yeah.
And there's actually some really good players who struggle on breakaways. I feel like Hagel's had some chances. This year.
You're talking about breakaways? Well, I mean, the shootout, the Lightning only had 3, so.
Yeah. And maybe that's why it's harder, I feel like, with the eye test, harder to score and convert more on breakaways, because our goaltender's just a little more accustomed to seeing it. Are they practicing it more because of how the game is set up in the regular season, where you may be seeing a few more shootouts? I don't know. The best I ever saw at breakaways, probably not a surprise. Mario. I mean, he was just like, guy could do whatever he wanted. Conversely, I don't think Sid is great on breakaways.
Yeah. And Gretzky said he didn't really like breakaways necessarily.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
He was no Eric Christensen.
It's a special skill. Like we talked about, I mean, in the shootout especially, there are shootout specialists. Jussi Jokinen was the most notable one when they introduced the shootout, how good he was.
Which Olympic was it? Where was it? TJ Oshie? They just kept.
I think you're
running
going to
him
have
out
Forsberg. Forsberg back in whatever it was, early 90s, 94 maybe, on Hasek.
Yeah.
Won the gold medal.
That was pretty sweet.
Yeah.
But Oshie,
that went to penalty shots, basically.
Yeah.
Oshie's shootout win
Russia?
was not in the gold medal game. That was just, I think it was in the qualifier, but it was like, was it one where the players could take them over and over and over again?
He kept taking him over, and I was like,
right.
All right, they, you can't stop me. And he was a pretty big force for sure. Anthony says, when you have one of the best 5-hole shooters in the league, and Guentzel, just look at him. In my mind, 70% of clean behind the net regroups start with the second forward swinging by when we go D to D and then D passes forward. I would prefer more drop passes in the neutral zone.
Is he talking about on the power play or just regular? He had 2 items there. He's talking about Guentzel's ability to shoot and score 5-hole, which I don't have enough data to be able to say if that's the case. I have seen him score 5-hole this year.
He can go 5-hole.
Yeah. Maybe you know that better than me.
He can go 5-hole.
Was that Anthony advocating the drop pass in the neutral zone? Like you and I are hair challenged. Phil is not, but if Phil kept hearing that, he would be as hair challenged as you and me because he would be pulling out his hair. Phil hates the drop pass in the neutral zone.
So do you think Phil would just rather have dump and chase?
Sometimes. I mean, look, if you can carry it in with speed, do it.
But that's probably what Bobby Orr did.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, but not everybody has a Bobby Orr. And it's interesting how the Copycat League continues, because that play where I know he gets nervous when Hedman does it. Hedman gets the center ice, and then sometimes it's a drop pass, and it can be off. And it's either Kucherov really coming with speed as the one, and it's kind of like the breakaway for the goaltender. You're doing that with speed to back off the defending players, but there's a risk there, because if Kucherov or whoever that player is coming with speed gets the puck poked from his stick, there's really nobody behind him. And so now you're left in a very vulnerable state.
The preference is to carry it in, though, on the power play. I mean, 5-on-5 depends, and it depends on the player.
Yes.
But the Lightning aren't the only team that more often than not, way, way, way more often than not, carries it across the blue line in the power play. What happened last night, and this was a drop pass not in the neutral zone, it was in the defensive zone. Hedman, it was in the second period, I remember, because it was in the net to our right. Hedman took it from behind the net, stepped in front, and tried to do the drop pass and got nothing on it. And Point and Kucherov, I can't remember which one was trying to get it, but there was a penalty killer for Philadelphia.
Right.
Close. almost stole the puck because there wasn't like that was just summed up exactly how the Lightning were playing with the puck. Like it just wasn't crisp at all. And the Lightning player ended up getting the puck before the Flyer penalty killer could. But had the Flyer intercepted the puck, that player would have been like 10 feet from Vasilevskiy with nobody in front of him. So you drop the puck on the power play, you better make sure that it is in a spot where the trailing player can get it, or else it maybe is coming back the other way.
It's kind of where the league is. Not everybody has somebody who can just go from one end to the other and bring the puck in.
Yeah.
I told you one of the best I've ever seen do it was Kovalev. I mean, he could just, and the thing about him, he could skate, but he also could stick handle. And so he just had this uncanny ability just to dance. Now, defenses are a little more structured now, I think, even 15 years ago. And so I think it's harder to do. But I think if you have somebody who can stick handle, what do they say in a phone booth, it helps because you're dealing in tight spaces often. Look, when in doubt, just dump it in. There's nothing wrong with that play, particularly when things are struggling. But it's something to kind of keep an eye on. But that's kind of where we are. All right, we'll get to more of your questions tomorrow. We are going to tape, I do believe, tomorrow's show.
We have a departure day.
You've got a departure day, and we'll look to sprinkle in maybe a couple of guests later in the week if we can. I know our audience enjoys that sometimes as well. And then, obviously, get those questions coming in at Bolts Radio, and we'll continue to read them on the air. Partner, great job as always, and I will talk to you tomorrow morning.
Talk to you tomorrow. Thanks
to Steve Ersnick. Thanks to you for listening and participating. We always appreciate you guys. I am Greg Linnelli. You've been listening to Power Lunch on Lightning Radio.